Absolutely. Well, as I said, we've got another.
Be our guest, put our podcast to the test. Be our guest, be our guest, be our guest.
So when I first played this jingle last week, it was really quite a funny little introduction, but now we're getting a bit more familiar with it, Barry.
I love it, Chad. I love it. And when I think it was your fiance Carl had the idea for how to do it. And when I heard the idea, I was blown away and I was all for it. So it's so cool to hear it again. It's the second week in a row.
Well, why don't you introduce our very second guest, Michael, who's actually also tuned in via Zoom, and he's waiting there in the background. Give him an introduction for us.
Yes, so my good friend Michael Daniel, I've known for a long, long time, played a lot of sport against and with him over the years. And he's one of the most interesting people I've ever met. And that's why I'd really love to bring him on tonight and kind of talk through some of the experiences he's had. He has had a very interesting career so far. He completed a degree in mechanical engineering up here in Joburg, but then realized it wasn't that fulfilling for him and he wanted something different. And so he did a complete 180, it feels like, and is now doing his master's in applied marine biology down in Cape Town. And what that's brought is a lot of interesting experiences around the world with various kind of conservation efforts and biological efforts. And tonight we're going to chat to him about his recent expedition to Antarctica, which I find fascinating. So Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Barry. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was chatting to Michael before the call and catching up. We haven't seen each other in a long time, but I believe you're down in Cape Town, and I believe the weather down there is not as great as in Britain either.
Oh, no, definitely not. As you said, we have a bit of a cold front, and today it's actually been raining the whole time.
Oh,
but here in Cape Town, we never want to complain about the rain after the floods we had a few years ago. So, I mean, droughts, sorry, not floods, of course.
Yeah. The rain is much needed, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So I think let's dig into a bit of your story. I mean, firstly, if we can kind of go into, that change, that 180 degree that Barry, you mentioned. I think, a lot of people actually go down this full end of a career spectrum and they kind of get there, realize it's not what they thought it would be. And I think it's quite a hard one and it takes a lot of real self-belief to make that 180 and actually go ahead with it.
Well, actually, funny you say 180. I don't really see it as a 180. I'm also convinced that I don't think anybody really knows what they want to do with their lives.
Yeah.
But I knew after I worked as a project manager down in Durban for a year and a bit. And although a great experience, I mean, I learned basically how to run a company, which was great. But sitting behind a desk all day answering emails was not for me. I mean, most of my friends knew that already and my family. So there wasn't much surprise when I said I wanted to change. But yeah, so straight from there, I went to do 6 months of volunteering. 3 months was spent in Greece doing turtle conservation, which absolutely opened my eyes. I did a thing they call turtle jumping, which is a capture and release technique where you literally jump off the boat and catch them.
Okay.
Obviously,
That
for
sounds amazing.
conservation reasons, it's for tagging and measuring and stuff. We're not just doing it for fun, obviously. Yeah, and then from there, I did another 3 months in the Seychelles doing island conservation on a tiny little island called Arid. And I was one of 10 people who lived on that island for 3 months, so it was absolutely incredible.
Fantastic. I mean, yeah, that does sound like a lot of fun that you've had there. I mean, the turtle thing sounds fun anyway, even though it wasn't for that reason. So why don't you talk us on to the sort of main reason Barry wanted to kind of chat about some of the things in your journey. I believe you spent some time in Antarctica as well.
Yes. So, well, strictly speaking, I can't actually say that I've been to Antarctica. I can only say that I've been into the Antarctic. So, as Barry said, I am doing my master's in applied marine biology this year, and after chatting to some of my fellow students who had been at UCT since for their whole undergrad, they spoke of these trips down to the Antarctic where students were able to accompany the ship and do scientific work on it. So obviously, as soon as I heard about this, I asked if all of them have been yet, and all of them kind of shrugged it off and said, "Oh no, I haven't been yet, I haven't really had time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and from there I went, I asked around, got jumped between a few lecturers, but eventually I got passed on to the correct guy, and he was looking for a student to help out on their plastics team, and I told him that I'm the man for the job, and a few months later I found myself on a ship heading towards the Antarctic sea ice. Yeah, it was incredible.
Wow. That's crazy. How long were you at sea for? Like how long were you planning to go for, and what was the mission about?
Okay, so the trip ended up being 6 weeks, but it was going to be anything from 5 to 7 weeks. And the reason they give that amount of time is because at sea you never really know, because you could hit bad weather and conditions, and because of the scientific work needing to be done, you sometimes have to postpone or cancel stations along the way. So we gave ourselves 2 weeks leeway. But the weather was actually perfect. We had a storm on the way back, but we actually managed to outrun it, so it was all good. When I say station, I mean it's just coordinates. So we stopped all the way down, going into the sea ice. So as I said, we didn't go to the continent of Antarctica. That's at about 70 degrees south. The maximum we went to was 60 degrees.
Okay.
Yeah. But we were still completely in the ice. So it was, once we were at that degree, it was ice as far as the eye can see, white to the horizon. Absolutely beautiful. And it was primarily a scientific cruise, actually a scale cruise, which is a very bad acronym, but it's Southern Ocean Seasonal Experiment. And they just took the letters from
where's the
those
sea?
that you can get scale from. Yeah. So it was actually, I think there were 4 of them. I was on the spring one because they want to do one in each season.
And what's the objective? What are they trying to accomplish on these missions?
Just gaining scientific knowledge. So I was one of many teams. As I said, I was part of the plastics team, which was just 2 of us. I had a team leader and myself as the helper, basically. But there were teams doing microbiology, so stuff like plankton. They call it primary production. There were teams, a trace X team, which were looking for trace metals. These are important because they affect the primary production. And primary production, you can think of it basically as the plants of the ocean. And so, although our forests produce oxygen, half of that oxygen is produced by the ocean. So that's why we're very interested in the microbiology of the ocean. So obviously the stuff that microbiology feeds on has to do with nutrient availability. And some of those nutrients are the metals that some teams were looking for. There was a weather team, obviously, doing weather, and they would actually meet every day with the captain to tell him what to look forward to weather-wise, so that we could keep out of the way of big swell and storms and things. We had a lot of engineers aboard, actually, something that is fairly new, and I would have loved to have known. Unfortunately, it wasn't while I was at WITS. But yeah, they were engineers. They were mostly the sea ice team, so they were doing mechanical properties of the sea ice. So they got a lot of the cores that we took. What else? There were oceanographic team, oceanographers. They were doing stuff like currents and things, and they were the guys who were leasing the extremely expensive scientific equipment as we went on a few stations. So these are like big sail buoys, they call them. You can basically think of them as surfboards with solar panels on them. And they glide themselves around. You obviously program where they need to go, and they take all kinds of atmospheric and ocean readings while they're going. They also deployed some buoys into the ice to pick up the swell and stuff, temperature going through the ice. What else? We had, I think there was a CO2 team there, part of the nutrient guys picking up in the atmosphere as well as the water. There's also, while the ship is going, at all times there's water being pumped through the lab where people are sampling it. I'm trying to think. And then obviously a lot of biologists there as well for the marine mammals. So there was a seal team, a whale team, and birders.
That is a huge range of like disciplines and like lots of different people doing different things. I guess they kind of all use the same boat because it's quite expensive to get there, I'm assuming.
Exactly, yeah. So I've heard stories, I don't know obviously the figures, but I think it is very expensive to run.
Yep.
And because of that, you want to be able to show what you're doing for it. So there's, as I said, there's a huge array of scientific work going on, and a lot of international people get involved as well. The SA Gallus 2, which is the ship, it's top of the range, made in Norway. this fully equipped scientific vessel. So it has labs, doors that the whole side of the ship opens to let scientific equipment out the side, cranes for lifting stuff on and off the ice. It was incredible. I mean, you can imagine the ship stopping in the middle of the ocean, swell all over the place, and it has these propellers all over the place to keep it still. And then the whole side of the ship opens, and they lower this scientific measuring device that drops to the ocean floor, which at some points, I think the deepest one was 4,800 meters. So we literally sat at the station for like 6 hours while this cable let the thing all the way down and then all the way back up. And the ship has to keep itself in the same place and try to stop rocking so that you don't snap the cable. I mean, there's some phenomenal engineering involved there.
I mean, that sounds absolutely fascinating, and obviously loads of technicalities to go through there. And yeah, I mean, it's going completely over my head, and I'm sure a lot of listeners as well, because yeah, I mean, this is obviously some very technical stuff. But if you kind of just bring it back to sort of basics, for you as a sort of guy, did you feel a little bit nervous to be on this ship, in the middle of nowhere, for all intents and purposes, in this foreign world?
Fear, I would say no. Initially, I was a little bit nervous, but that's mostly, any traveling experience, you get nervous because it's kind of nerves of the unknown. And I must say, I was a little bit nervous about getting seasick because I'd heard some terrible stories.
Yeah.
But luckily for me, I felt a little bit uneasy as we left the harbor and got into the open ocean. But lucky for me, I actually had nothing after that. And then once you're in the ice, you can't feel the swell at all. So it's actually beautiful.
And the weather, was it as cold as everyone imagines it to be?
It is absolutely freezing. And I must say, okay, so I was there in spring. So it wasn't nearly as cold as it got. So, I think the lowest temperature we had was somewhere around -10. But the temperature itself is not the thing that's dangerous. It's the winds. Because, the wind barely ever dropped below, I would say average, it was about 20 knots. So with that, the wind chill, we had safety briefings all the time. At the beginning of the cruise, we actually had a presentation from the onboard doctor about warnings about frostbite and the signs and symptoms and things to look out for. Because there had been oaks before, mostly on the winter cruises where it was getting to -20, -19, -20 degrees C with like 30 knot winds. And these guys were out on the ice working with their hands, obviously gloves, but with the wind chill, it just got out of hand. But luckily for us, we had no instances. -5 or -10 is not too bad and it's manageable. And we had lots of safety protocols, and nobody was allowed out on the ice for more than, I think it was 2 hours at a time. So it was constantly rotating. Yeah, no, it was incredible.
That is hectic. It kind of brings me to an amazing photo you got on your blog of you in a South African Speedo holding this giant balloon over your head. And I think for all of us South Africans, we all remember where we were when South Africa won that World Cup. Absolutely. I remember I was in San Francisco at like 4 a.m. in the morning with a huge pub full of pommies and South Africans. Mike, you were on the ship for that World Cup victory. What was that like?
Yes, it was incredible. So we actually lived in luxury on that ship. We did have Wi-Fi. A lot of these ships, you have no connection with the outside world. Very bad Wi-Fi, but for the World Cup, the captain cut all of the Wi-Fi except for, obviously, the bridge for emergencies and the auditorium. So for the time of the World Cup, all work on the ship stops, and like the whole crew and the scientists were all in one room, watching on massive projectors, and you can imagine once we won, it was wild. Shouting, screaming, hugging. Yes, no, it was crazy.
I can imagine. Just being with so many South Africans, I suppose, is so fantastic. I was even in Norway, funny enough. You obviously mentioned the manufacture of the ship. And the one thing that, when you're in a victory like that is just having people with you. I suppose the fact that you were on the ship with South Africans helps. But the fact that around you were miles and miles of just nothingness. That must have been a little bit eerie.
Yeah, a little bit eerie. But, I can't think of a better place to be. You think you're far from home, but we had surrounded by South Africans. The head scientist was actually a POM, so he wasn't the happiest man, but, we were. And it was so great because the most South African thing we could do after we won was actually a braai. And the captain organized a
amazing.
braai for the day of the World Cup. It's like he knew we were going to win, because after we'd won, we all went down onto the heli deck, and they opened the big hangar doors for when they usually keep helicopters in there when they go and relieve other islands. But it was all open. They had massive braais outside with the log fires going already. And we had a massive braai and jawled on the heli deck while the snow was coming down. It was incredible.
I mean, I have to ask, with those, crazy not wind speeds, who was the Bry Master that managed that magnificent achievement?
There were many Bry Mosses, and they were a handful of the crew. But once the fires were going, it was kind of, they put the meat out, and then you went and meat and vegetables and whatever you wanted. Right. And you went there and you actually braaied it yourself. So they had this long row of braais set out, and everybody just made groups on either side, and you sat chatting there, flipping your burri and whatnot. It was great, yeah.
Coming back to marine biology for a second, I think that one of the things that really attracted me to your post was some of the photos that you have of kind of the marine wildlife, some of the birds, some of the seals, etc. And the photos look insane. It kind of looks like an alien planet when you kind of look at all that ice. I wanted to ask, do the photos do it justice? Or is there something that being there is very, very different to seeing a photo of it?
I think it's true for almost any photo that it never kind of captures the feeling. Yeah, that you have, because it's always just, it's framed, so you never get like the whole atmosphere, I mean, being in the ice, it's hard to explain, but it's just vast. Far as the eye can see, it's white, and actually at times it's very difficult to gauge the distance, because I mean, on land you can kind of see a bit of a hill, even if it's flat, like Bloemfontein. I mean, you can see structures and you'll know kind of how far away you are from stuff, but out there, when it's frozen ocean and it's white and you can't see any blemishes or anything, you kind of can't gauge distance, and you can almost see the curvature of the earth because there's nothing, like nothing in your line of sight. Yeah, it's incredible.
So, I mean, my only next question is, when are you going back?
Yeah, it's funny you actually asked that, because I'm looking at going back this end of the year. So
okay.
I started asking while I was on board, because I was enjoying it so much. So that was a short 6-week trip. But every year, the SA Agulhas actually goes to the Antarctic base to relieve the previous year's team.
Right.
So on the way there, I think they relieve a few islands, and they go, and that's when they take their helicopters and they're transferring crew and diesel and food and all of that across. And that's a 3-month voyage. So I'm hoping I'm going to be able to weasel my way on there somewhere. I mean, I made some good connections, so hopefully somebody needs a helping hand.
That is amazing. One last question before we end up, Mike. I wanted to ask, obviously climate change is a big discussion around the world right now, and kind of the oceans are one of the biggest ecosystems that are already struggling because of climate change. And you have now got opportunities to see some of the effects and see some of the things that are happening. What is something that you wish people would appreciate about the marine world or about the oceans that kind of the common person living in a city doesn't really appreciate?
For me, it's the beauty and the diversity of everything. And it's something that comes back to the picture idea, because it's great to take pictures of stuff. But I believe getting people involved in conservation is, you need to have people having these experiences, these incredible experiences with wildlife and nature. So, I mean, I think that's the key to conservation, because once you get in the water or you see these things with your naked eyes, it's life-changing. Well, I mean, obviously it was for me with this career change, but I really do, I think that's the key to getting more people involved, is getting the word out there to more and more people. And hopefully that's, with my pictures and stuff, I can encourage people to go out and see some of these things, Hopefully I'll do my little bit to save the planet.
I mean, talking about pictures, just one of the things, I'm obviously a photography nerd. Are you going to be making any investment in some drones on the next voyage?
I would absolutely love that. I was wondering why there wasn't actually a drone on this voyage, but I think it has a lot to do with the wind. Because from what I understand, it's quite difficult to fly drones in high winds, and I mean, it was gusting, as I said, usually about 20 knots, but up to about 50, and I don't think that's really possible. But I mean, if I can get my hands on a drone, 100% I'll give it a go.
Well, we look forward to seeing that footage. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. For all of those listening and watching, I'm going to link Mike's blog post in all our social media, so please go and check it out. His writing style is awesome. I was telling him before, his blog is amazing, and the photos are really worth going to check out. And hopefully it inspires the next generation of biologists who are going to have to kind of carry this mantelpiece forward. And I think for all of us who are living in our cities, are very disconnected from the natural world, it's important for all of us to kind of get a sense as to what's happening out there, what's happening to our natural ecosystems, and realize that your actions actually have implications, and they have consequences. And the more people can start to understand this, hopefully we can try to reverse some of the stuff we've seen and put ourselves on a more sustainable track. So thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Such a pleasure, Barry. Thanks for having me.
Well, we'll certainly keep updated with what Mike is up to, and certainly if there's another voyage going on, we'll be sure to have that covered as well. So Barry, shall we move on to our next segment?
Let's look at the week that was.
Across the pond.